You walk into a room and you already know who holds the power. You feel it before a single word is spoken. Something in the posture, the stillness, the way one person occupies space while another apologizes for existing inside it. You have always sensed this. You have never had language for it. That absence of language is not an accident. The modern world has given you 1,000 tools to express yourself and almost none to observe others. You have been trained to speak, to share, to perform transparency as though visibility is virtue. Meanwhile, the person sitting across from you, the one who says very little, who nods slowly, who asks nothing, that person is reading every word you did not say. This is the gap, not between intelligence and ignorance, between the disciplined and the exposed. The Stoics called it prosoche, attention. Not the scattered, scrolling half-attention the modern mind has normalized, but a razor-focused, inward and outward awareness that functions like a blade kept sharp through daily use. Marcus Aurelius did not build his capacity to read men in the Senate chamber by accident. He built it in silence, in the hours before Rome woke, pressing his mind against the stone of self-examination until observation became reflex. You live in an era that has monetized distraction. Every platform, every notification, every algorithmically engineered interruption is a calculated erosion of your perceptive faculty. The person who cannot sit in silence for 10 minutes cannot read a room. They can only react to it. And reaction is the posture of the weak, always one step behind, always managed by whoever chose to remain still. History's most formidable minds did not interrogate, they observed. They constructed environments, conversational, social, architectural, that functioned as mirrors. And mirrors do not ask questions, they simply reflect. The person standing before one has no choice but to reveal themselves. This is the first principle of reading people without a word. Create conditions for confession, not through manipulation. Through silence and structure. When you stop filling every silence with your own voice, others will fill it with theirs. And in what they choose to fill it with, they tell you everything. Watch what a person defends without being attacked. Watch what they mention twice. Watch where their eyes move when they believe no one is calibrated to them. These are not tricks. They are the architecture of attention, the same architecture the philosopher built in his academy. The same the warrior used to assess an opponent before the first strike was ever thrown. The fracture in most people is not that they cannot see. It is that they have never been taught to be still enough to look. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is the iron foundation beneath the marble surface, invisible, load-bearing, absolute. Here is the paradox that should unsettle you. The more you reveal in an attempt to connect, the less others trust what they see. And the more you withhold, not from coldness, but from discipline, the more they lean toward you, searching for the reflection they cannot quite reach. Silence wielded with intention is not absence, it is the sharpest instrument in the room. And you have been leaving it unused. Part 2 will show you where to look first, and what you will find there that most people spend a lifetime pretending is not visible. The body is not loyal to the mind that inhabits it. This is the first thing you must understand. A person can construct a careful sentence, rehearse a tone, manage their expression, and still betray everything through the architecture of how they hold themselves in space. The warrior knew this before the first weapon was ever lifted. You read the opponent's weight distribution before you read their eyes. You read what they protect before you read what they project. The modern professional has been trained to believe that communication is verbal. That the words chosen, the credentials displayed, the narrative curated, these are the substance of a person. This is the single most expensive misconception you will carry into any room. Words are the surface, the body is the stone beneath, and stone does not lie. Watch where tension lives. Not the grand gestures those are performed, watch the small architecture. The jaw that tightens when a certain name is spoken. The shoulders that rise a fraction of an inch when authority enters the room. The hands that still themselves too deliberately, because stillness that is forced carries its own signature. These microcontractions are not psychology tricks. They are the iron framework of a person's inner world. Momentarily visible through the marble surface they have spent years polishing. The Stoic did not read people to gain advantage in the shallow sense. The Stoic read people to understand the weight they were carrying, because a person's weight determines their trajectory. And trajectory is the only thing that matters in any relationship, any negotiation, any room. Consider this. Two people enter a meeting. One arrives slightly early and chooses a seat that places their back to a wall. They arrange nothing on the table in front of them. They carry no visible anxiety about the space. When others enter, this person does not greet them immediately. They observe, they allow the room to settle around them like sediment in still water. This is the sovereign not because of title, not because of rank, but because of the relationship they have built with silence and space. The second person arrives and immediately begins adjusting. Their bag, their chair, their phone placement. They offer a greeting before one is required. They fill the first available silence with a comment about the weather or the commute, something frictionless. Something that costs nothing. Because they cannot tolerate the pressure of an unfilled moment. They are not weak in character, they are untrained in stillness. And that absence of training is a fracture the room can read before the meeting begins. Nothing dramatic has occurred. No confrontation, no words of consequence. And yet the shadow of authority has already fallen across the table, cast by one person and absorbed by the other. The disciplined do not announce themselves. They allow the architecture of their presence to speak in a register that most people cannot consciously hear, but every person instinctively feels. This is the scene that repeats itself in every office, every negotiation, every dinner table where power is quietly distributed before the first course is served. The first pillar is the body, the second is repetition. What a person returns to, without being directed there, is the map of what governs them. Listen to what someone mentions twice. Not twice in a prepared speech, twice across unrelated moments in a conversation. That repetition is not coincidence. It is the mind circling what it cannot resolve. The unfinished fracture always draws the eye back. The philosopher understood this. The examined life was not a life of constant self-expression. It was a life of noticing what kept returning. What refused to stay buried under the marble surface of daily performance. In practice, this means you must become a different kind of listener. Not the listener who waits for their turn to speak. Not the listener who tracks the argument to find its weakness. You must become the listener who maps the terrain, who notices the emotional geography of what is being said. Where the elevation rises, where the ground goes soft. A person who mentions their father twice in a conversation about work is not talking about work. A person who returns to a past success in a conversation about the future is not talking about the future. They are standing in a room they cannot leave, describing it as though it is a window. This is not a technique, it is a discipline. And like all disciplines, it requires you to silence the loudest instrument in the room, which is almost always yourself. The cost of ignoring these two pillars is not dramatic. It does not arrive as catastrophe. It arrives as a slow accumulation of rooms where you were managed without knowing it. Negotiations where the terms were set before you opened your mouth. Relationships where the power was never distributed evenly because one person was reading and the other was performing. The fracture does not announce itself. It simply widens, quietly, beneath the marble surface you have spent your life maintaining above it. Part 3 will show you what to do with what you now see, and why that final step is the one most people never take. The fracture does not announce itself. It simply widens, quietly, beneath the marble surface you have spent your life maintaining above it. And now you see it. You see the body's confession. You hear the repetition that maps what a person cannot resolve. You have the architecture of perception. What you do with it, that is where most people stop. Not because they lack courage, because they have never been given a framework ruthless enough to use. Knowledge without application is the most expensive form of comfort. The philosopher did not observe the cave and then sit back down inside it. The warrior did not read his opponent's weight and then forget to move. Perception without action is not wisdom. It is a more refined version of being managed, because now you see the mechanism and still choose not to operate it. This is the protocol, 3 steps, not principles to consider, commands to execute. First, silence before entry, before you speak in any room, in any conversation. In any negotiation, allow 3 seconds of deliberate stillness. Not hesitation, not anxiety, stillness chosen like a blade lifted from its sheath. In those 3 seconds, you are reading the room's architecture, who leans toward whom, who avoids whose eye, where the tension lives before a single word has been exchanged. The sovereign does not arrive and immediately perform. The sovereign arrives and allows the room to reveal its structure. That 3-second pause costs you nothing and returns to you everything the room was trying to hide. The asymmetric outcome is this. You will enter having already read what others will spend the entire encounter trying to understand. Second, map the repetition in real time. While the other person speaks, you are not constructing your response. You are tracking what returns. You hold their words the way stone holds heat, absorbing without reacting, retaining without display. When a subject surfaces twice, you do not comment on it, you file it. You note the elevation in their voice, the slight acceleration, the fractional shift in their posture. The disciplined do not reveal what they have seen. They allow the other person to believe the map is still hidden. What you have now is leverage, not in the manipulative sense but in the architectural sense. You know where the load-bearing wall is. You know what, if moved, changes the entire structure of the exchange. The asymmetric outcome is this. You will understand their position more completely than they have articulated it. And they will feel, without knowing why, that you are someone worth trusting. Third, respond to the stone, not the marble. When you finally speak, you do not respond to the surface. You do not engage the performance. You speak to the fracture beneath, not to expose it but to acknowledge it with precision. A single sentence aimed at what a person is actually carrying lands with more weight than an hour of conversation aimed at what they are presenting. The Stoic understood that the most powerful thing you can offer another person is proof that you saw them before they finished constructing the version they wanted you to see. That proof does not require words of comfort, it requires words of accuracy. The asymmetric outcome is this: the room shifts permanently, and the shadow of authority falls in the direction you have chosen. You are not yet who this discipline will make you. That is not a failure, that is the condition of the unfinished. Marble does not apologize for the chisel, iron does not resist the forge. The fractures in your perception, the rooms where you were managed. The negotiations where the terms were already set. The relationships where you performed while another person read, those fractures are not evidence of weakness. They are the architecture waiting to be filled with gold. Kintsugi does not hide the break, it makes the break the most valuable part of the surface. You are at the beginning of a different kind of attention. Not the scattered, reactive attention the modern world has normalized. The razor-focused, inward and outward awareness that the Stoics sharpened in silence before Rome woke. The discipline is not comfortable, it was never designed to be. Comfort is the marble surface, mastery is the iron beneath it. The person who has walked through all three pillars, the body's confession, the map of repetition, and the three commands of the disciplined observer, does not leave a room the same way they entered it. They carry something the untrained eye cannot see, and the untrained mind cannot name. It is not arrogance, arrogance is performance, what they carry is calibration. A finely forged instrument that grows more precise with every room, every silence. Every moment of stillness chosen over reaction. The sovereign does not announce what they have seen. They simply act with the accuracy of someone who saw it. And that accuracy over time becomes its own kind of shadow, the kind that falls across every table before the first word is spoken. This is not a skill you acquire once, it is a blade you keep sharp through daily use. Prosoche, attention, the ancient word for the practice that separates the disciplined from the exposed. You now have the architecture, what you build inside it is yours to forge. Only those who refuse comfort will understand what comes next. Subscribe to Marble and Mind.